Good evening to everybody and welcome to this performance. This is Saturday the 16th of January and this is Christopher Daigan coming to you from our home in KwaZulu-Natal with our in-concert Saturday session. It is Saturday the 16th, another fascinating, I hope really fascinating program for you this evening. If you're able to join us for the next hour or so and enjoy some beautiful music, a classical selection of piano music, along with something which is going to be quite interesting and I think it's been a lot of work for me and quite challenging, but I think it's going to add an extra element to the program. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So this is our 84th live stream. It's been a very difficult week, I think, out in the world for many people, and I really hope this music is going to offer you some solace, a chance to remedy a balm for your soul and just take your mind away from everything in the real world just for a short while. And I want to thank my partner Barry, who's running the controls again this evening and who's also put a huge amount of work and effort into making this possible. So we're going to dive straight in at 6 o'clock. I've been always fascinated by the lives of the composers, the lives of the great composers, particularly because this music that we play and that we hear and listen to and live with is actually written by real people. We sometimes forget that. And I'm always fascinated by the images, the portraits, the photographs of these composers and trying to get something of a glimpse into their lives and their personality. And a few weeks ago, while I was scrolling through Facebook, as one does, I was met face to face with an image, a photographic image of someone that I recognized, and one of these characters, one of these composers that I knew, but in a completely realistic 3D computer animated graphic format, and it was quite startling to see in such incredible detail and such lifelike realism what this person actually looked like. And so this evening I'm going to be featuring the work of an Iranian artist, which I've managed to contact through Facebook, whose name is Hadi Karimi. He lives in Tehran, and he's given me, kindly given me permission to use several of his images in this evening's live stream. And these are images that he's created. He's obviously an incredibly expert graphic artist, but he's set about a series of creating realistic portraits, sometimes of living people, but also a series of composers, which is obviously a great interest to him. If you visit his website, hadikarimi.com, you'll be able to see the formats and more detail about how he's gone about this. But he's really based his interpretations on paintings, contemporary paintings of these artists, drawings, photographs, and sometimes even death masks, and in some cases, I believe, a lock of hair, which he had access to in a museum, or which he was able to study and create really lifelike representations of these composers. And I'm very grateful and thank you to him for allowing us to share this with you, because you can see all of this at his website and on Facebook and Instagram. And I really urge you to follow him and do have a look, because it's a really fascinating process how he works through this. But then also with sharing these images in the live stream visually, which has been quite a challenge to incorporate them into our stream this evening, I've also then furthered that with looking at some really wonderful portraits by sometimes quite great artists of these composers to compare these and to show you some really wonderful artworks that give us an idea of how these composers looked and who maybe an insight into who they really are. So I'm going to ask Barry to show you the first of these images, which is a very famous painting of the composer J.S. Bach. Now, Bach himself was painted, this is a painting by an artist of the time, painted when he was 65 years old. And there's a very interesting story about this. This painting actually, until just a few years ago, I think it was 2015, was in private hands. And it was in a museum, I think, in England. And during the Second World War, it actually was smuggled away into the countryside to the home of John Eliot Gardiner, the great musician, conductor of today, into his parents' home for safekeeping away from the bombings of England. And it was subsequently sold by an American investor who owned this portrait. In fact, in the article I read, his wife said that she felt like she was living in a marriage of three, her husband, and this incredibly famous and renowned portrait of Bach. Anyway, after his death, it was donated to the Bach archive in Leipzig, where it is now resident, and it is now part of their amazing Bach grouping of manuscripts and images. And the next image then I'd like to show you is the artist Hadi Karimi's interpretation of what, according to these portraits and his information, Bach actually looked like. And this is quite frightening, because suddenly here is not a musician who is from someone born in 1685, who's visible not only in an oil painting, but actually in photographic life-like realism. It's really quite astounding to see this. So I'm going to play a composition for you by Bach, and then after that a composition by Mozart. So I'd like to just show you a very interesting story about a portrait by Mozart. This particular portrait was painted by Mozart's brother-in-law, Johann or Joseph de Lange. And this is a very beautiful image. I mean, it really shows the sensitivity and the lightness, I think, in Mozart's face. What is quite intriguing, if you look at the next image, you will see that, in fact, that portrait was a miniature which the artist had painted and then patched onto this larger portrait which he intended to complete. So he painted the miniature of the face first, and then intended to complete the whole picture by patching that section onto the canvas, but it was never completed. There is, unfortunately, in the series of graphic reproductions, no modern version yet. I'm sure it will be coming, a contemporary version of what Mozart looked like. But there for you, I think, are two very unique images, and I'm sure you will see them again during the performances that I'm about to play. So for a piece of music by Bach, I would like to play for you, probably composed around that time when Bach's portrait was painted, when he was 65 years old, the Goldberg Variations, or at least the aria from the Goldberg Variations. This is a piece of music that Bach was paid handsomely for, because the Count Goldberg had asked him to write a set or a composition that would help him either be lulled to sleep. He suffered from insomnia, and if it wasn't going to put him to sleep, it was going to help him be amused during the dark hours of night while he listened to someone playing this music. And it's a very beautiful, it's really one of the greatest compositions of music ever, one of Bach's great masterpieces, and a beautiful aria or song to start. The second piece of music then by Mozart, the first movement of the Sonata K332, Sonata in F major. This is really showing Mozart at his brightest, his most brilliant, outgoing and orchestral style, some trumpet calls here and there, you might say, but also a great lyricism and sensitivity. was the first movement of the sonata by Mozart, K332, the sonata in F major. And before that, I played the opening aria of J.S. Bach's Goldberg Variations, really a magnificent and beautiful piece of music. I think the magic of the Goldberg Variations must have worked. We have Wendy and we have Frida with us fast asleep. They certainly are being lulled into a state of sleep and complete indulgence. They're not even hearing me talk. They're completely oblivious to what is going on out in the world. Need some information, so excuse me for a second. Not quite sure why my screen disappeared. Moving on to the music of two composers, that of Beethoven and Schubert. And I'd like to share with you, first of all, the composer, a very famous painting by the artist Joseph Mahler of Beethoven, painted in 1815. This is one of the most famous portraits of all. It really shows the composer at the height of his fame, at the brilliance as a pianist, as a virtuoso of the day, and certainly someone who was greatly fond of communing with nature, taking long walks in the woods, and a very natural but a very confident young man himself. Following that, the artist, as I said, I'm featuring the portraits and the 3D computer graphics this evening of the Iranian artist Hadi Karimi. And these are some of the images that he has created of Beethoven, including, according to descriptions, Beethoven's rather pockmarked face and a rather dark complexion, a very strong brow, and a very strong and a very stern jaw. And it's quite interesting and quite fascinating to see this recreation. As I said, these are really based on a number of portraits of the time and a number of very detailed, realistic effects to try and really give us a sense of what Beethoven would have looked like. Certainly an artist's impression, but certainly at the same time, a great amount of research and interest, detail has gone in to make this possible, to make this correct. The second portrait by Schubert, by Wilhelm August Rieder, painted in 1875, a beautiful portrait of Schubert. And you might say, well, how on earth did this artist paint this in 1875 as Schubert died in 1829? Well, it's a copy of a watercolor that he made during Schubert's life and then repainted it as an oil some 50 or so years later. But in terms of the computer graphic artists, this is what he, from his research, and a very lifelike, I mean, it's incredibly exciting to see these images up close, to see them really in great detail. And you can see all of this, as I said, at his website and also at his Facebook page and Instagram. The link of the website will be coming up later. And it's really fascinating. As I said, when I first saw these images, I was completely astounded to come face to face with someone who somehow knew what they looked like, but to see such a realistic photograph of them was quite startling and quite astounding indeed. So for the music for Beethoven, Barry's asked me to play one of his favorite pieces. This is the second movement from the Sonata Opus 27, number 1, a sonata I've played quite often, the companion to the Moonlight Sonata. It's it's just one driven energy from beginning to end, quite short, but very exciting and very expressive piece that I really think gets to the core of Beethoven's determination, his energy, and yet also there's a certain expressiveness that comes through in that. And the second piece of music by Schubert is very famous, Impromptu in G flat. Really an incredibly sublime and heavenly piece of music, something I think we all need at the moment. A beautiful hymn, a beautiful melody that just unwinds in a very calm and beautiful way. The music there of Franz Schubert, his impromptu from the first set impromptu, the third of the first set, the impromptu in G flat major, such an incredibly beautiful melody, like a hymn that just unwinds like a long seamless thread. And before that, in great contrast, rhythmically driven and very exciting, but still with its expressive beauty, the second movement from Beethoven's Sonata Opus 27, number 1, the companion to the Sonata Opus 27, number 2. Now I'm going to move on to 3 composers, that is with are Schumann, Liszt, and Brahms. Now, by this time, obviously, the technological advances have changed in terms of how composers of the day were being captured. And in fact, we are going to see a daguerreotype, which is a type of early photograph of Schumann in 1850, followed by the artist Hadi Karimi's rendition, a contemporary rendition of what he thinks Schumann looked like. And it's quite a strong, a really amazing resemblance how the two fit together there. Schumann himself lived such an incredibly tragic life, composing an incredible amount of music, so in love with his piano teacher's daughter, Clara Wieck. I've always talked about it. And on the Contemporary Artist's website, you will see actually recreation or reproduction, an idea of what Clara Wieck looked like, and then ends up in his later years trying to take his own life and really not coping with the world terribly well. The second picture by Brahms, who was also tied up in this affair, tied up in this story between Liszt, Schumann, and Schumann's wife, Clara Wieck, or more between Brahms and Schumann, Brahms and Clara Wieck at least. A photograph of 1853 of Brahms, the young Johannes Brahms, who really had such a strong relationship with Clara Wieck and with Schumann himself. And this is a very stern musician, a young musician, composer who's very serious about his music and very serious about the world. And a wonderful recreation in the Contemporary Graphic Artist. You'll see how these two pictures fit together. There's the young Brahms in a photographic realism, quite incredible to see. Now, Brahms didn't endear himself to Liszt. I'm getting my stories muddled up here. Liszt unveiled at a private sitting one of what we now regard as one of the greatest works of the 19th century, and one of the greatest works, probably the greatest work that Liszt composed, incredibly revolutionary, piece of music that was incredibly tightly structured, brought together the idea of the program. In other words, music that has a story behind it. Liszt's brilliant technique, everything that Liszt was capable of came together in this one composition. Not only was a great flamboyant stage virtuoso of the day was Franz Liszt, he was also a very serious musician. And in his B minor sonata, he sought to really create something quite exceptional. This particular painting here that you are seeing now is by Henri Lehmann, the artist Lehmann, painted in 1840. Liszt, in his height of his virtuoso days, traveling all over Europe in his black Hungarian outfit, traditional outfit that he wore. He always wore this black tunic when he was playing, apparently, and really see the incredible startling, the green eyes and the startling stare that Liszt dazzled his audiences. I was reading a biography recently about Liszt, and it seems, from what I'm understanding, Liszt actually stared and engaged with the audience, stared at the audience while he was actually performing. And then this is the artist's recreation, the computer graphic version of Liszt, probably at around the same time. Now, as I was saying to you, Liszt unveiled this B minor sonata to Brahms and a small audience, and Brahms did the most unspeakable. He fell asleep. Liszt, the great pianist, the great virtuoso pianist, not particularly popular with Brahms, and certainly Brahms was not particularly popular with Liszt after this affair, when he was being unveiled his great masterpiece, and Brahms promptly dozed off. He had maybe been listening to the Goldberg variations, like old Frida is here. So I'm going to play three compositions for you, the first of which is the Schumann from the Fantasiestücke, the fantasy pieces, a piece called Aufschwung, or Soaring. Really shows us Schumann's brilliance in terms of his engagement, his energy, throwing himself into the great energy of music, and the combination of exuberance and a complete outpouring of passionate feelings and ideas, soaring in every kind of imaginative sense, you might say. The second piece, the wonderful Liebestraum by Franz Liszt, Dreams of Love. The third of the three Liebestraums that Liszt wrote originally for voice and piano and then recreated them for solo piano. And the third, a short piece of music by Brahms, is very popular, Waltz in A Flat. I'm playing something from the earlier years, probably around that time when, in fact, those particular images of Brahms were created. Goodness, so that was a very short piece of music for Brahms. I didn't realize quite how short it was, probably less than 2 or 3 minutes. Anyway, one of the famous waltzes, Opus 39 by Brahms. I don't, as I said many times before, I don't really have much Brahms' music in my repertoire. And certainly the pieces that I do play are generally have played from the very last years, which with Brahms was a much older man than what you've seen in those pictures. So it brings us to the end, the last composer in this program, and as I mentioned, this was the face that I saw staring out at me, that I had recognized, that I'd seen and looked at so many times, and that is of the composer, of course, Frederick Chopin. Now, Chopin was photographed in the year of his death in Paris in 1849, and this is one of 2 photographs that we know to be of the composer. Apparently, this photograph was taken by a photographer, which I'll tell you in a second, my computer is. Louis-Auguste Bisson in 1849 took this photograph in the heat of midsummer in Paris, but you can see Chopin in his last months of his life. The illness really taking its toll, is wrapped up in a heavy overcoat and a number of layers. His face is swollen from the illness that was to take his life a few months later, and really not a very flattering portrait of the composer who really had stolen so many hearts. What is interesting, however, I'd like to show you a portrait by the acknowledged as one of the great romantic portrait painters and great romantic artists of the time, and that is Eugène Delacroix, who was also a great friend of Chopin's. Now, this particular painting which you see here is actually a reconstruction. It is a reconstruction that the artist Delacroix was working on of Chopin at the piano and Georges Sand. Now, interestingly, Georges Sand is dressed in women's attire rather than men's outfits, which is what she actually wore for much of the time. And the reason why I say this is a construction is that this portrait was unfinished, and the parts of the portrait were in fact cut up. And Chopin's face now exists in the Louvre, and there's one of the most beautiful and I think one of the most fascinating portraits of the composer. Georges Sand exists in another place, somewhere else, I think. And I mean, it's incredible. How can someone cut up a painting? Well, apparently the artist's family felt that they would get a higher price considering that the painting was unfinished, and also the fact that they could then sell 2 separate paintings, especially one so magnificent actually and so telling of the composer Frederick Chopin. But here you will see in fact the artist, and I'm coming back to this again, Hadi Karimi, the Iranian computer graphic artist, has incredibly created the really most outstanding images here, and you're going to see 3 of them in total. In fact, if you visit his website, you can see a number of short video clips that show you these figures in animated 3D. And also, as I said, it's really worth visiting the website because you can read so much about how he's constructed this, how he's chosen the various layers, the skin tones, the hair, the outfit, and the shape of the face. And it's really incredible. So I say this was the image that I saw popping out at me on, I've got to move this way now, popping out at me on Facebook when I saw it. And I recognized the face immediately, but I thought, gosh, I've never seen a photograph of that person before. So there we go, Frederick Chopin. I'm sure Barry's going to play you some of these images while I am performing for you now. And I'd like to play and end this evening's program with the magnificent composition, the Ballade No. 1, regarded by some people as one of the greatest pieces of music ever written, in fact. Certainly one of Chopin's most robust, outgoing, and heroic pieces. It spans a huge life from the most intimate, delicate moments, internal moments, to great triumphant anthems with a very resounding and definite tail piece to finish off the composition, and a very final and definite ending. I've often told people that they shouldn't clap. Of course, if you're all sitting at home, you're not going to be clapping at all, so it's not going to affect anyone. But the piece ends, carries on, and then finally ends. So there's 3 endings. Just when you think it's finished, it does finally carry on till a tumultuous end of all endings. So this is the Ballade No. 1, Opus 23 in G minor by Frederick Chopin. Well, we haven't heard that for a while. The Ballade number 1, the first of 4 ballades by the composer Frederick Chopin, brings an end to this evening's program. I hope you've enjoyed the selection of music. I really hope that you've enjoyed the selection of images, and thank you again to Hadi Karimi, the Iranian computer graphic and 3D animation artist, for allowing us, giving us permission to use his really interesting, really beautiful and wonderfully created images in our live stream. So I say please do visit his website. You will find so many links, a number of other portraits of contemporary artists as well, but certainly more composers. There's Mendelssohn, Clara Schumann, and I'm sure there are more to come. Certainly an artist to follow, because it's always so surprising and so incredibly exciting to see these new images of well-known familiar faces just appear. I can see it has little Wendy Pop has joined us, but she's having a nibble with Frida. They're having a little play tumble on the floor. So thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for Barry at the controls. It's been quite a mission to manage all these images and texts and credits coming through for the various images. I hope I've got them all right. I hope he's got them all right. It's been a wonderful evening of music, and we look forward to sharing some more fascinating ideas with you. If you are able to support us, please do visit our donation page at musicrevival.co.za. And Wednesday's program, Wednesday at 6 p.m, I'll be playing a really heartwarming, very nostalgic and very beautifully balanced program, I think, called Tales from Grandmother's Piano Album. All the domestic piano classics like The Rustle of Spring, Fur-Elise, the Melody in F by Rubinstein, March of the Tin Soldiers, number of compositions that you don't often hear, or you actually never hear in a public concert, but certainly many people play at home for their own enjoyment. These popular piano books of very attractive romantic pieces, compiled them all together, including the Maiden's Prayer, very beautiful little composition. So do hope you can join us on Wednesday at 6 p.m. And then next Saturday again, another brilliant program of concert classics, including some great, brilliant music by Chopin and the Hungarian Rhapsody by Franz Liszt. Thank you for joining us. Look after yourself. Please stay safe. Keep well. And we look forward to seeing you at our session on Wednesday and next week, Saturday. How are you doing, girls? You all okay?